Welcome back to Peer-Guided DBT Lessons, provided by DBT Skills Application, Peers Helping Peers. This week's lesson, marked 3-8 in our Emotion Regulation module, is a continuation of our examination of primary and secondary emotions. This week we'll be looking at secondary emotions. Please keep in mind that we're simply peers helping peers, working together to bring about more peaceful, constructive, and ultimately happier lives. In other words, a life worth living. There are two kinds of emotional experiences. First of all, primary emotions. Some emotional experiences are primarily reactions to events in one's environment. Being angry at someone for criticizing, feeling happy that a loved one is coming to visit, being surprised that it is a nice day when rain was predicted, etc. Primary emotions may also be called justified emotions. And then we have secondary emotions. Other emotional experiences are primarily reactions to one's own thoughts, actions, and feelings. Guilt about feeling angry, anger at being unable to remember something, shame at not doing well on a task, pride at winning a race, etc. When they are emotional reactions to our own emotions, they are called secondary emotions, or unjustified emotions. Does the emotion fit the facts? The easiest way to figure out whether you are experiencing a primary or secondary emotion is to ask whether the emotion and its intensity fit the facts of the situation. If your emotion fits the facts, it is usually a primary emotion. If it does not fit the facts, it is usually a secondary emotion. So ask yourself, does it fit the facts? Is the emotion the most logical considering the circumstances? Check. Is it one of the basic emotions? Check. Does the intensity of the emotion fit the situation? Check. Was this the first emotion felt following the triggering event? Check. Is this emotion motivating me to act? Check. If your emotion fits the facts, it is usually a primary emotion. Let's take a look at what is differentiating between primary and secondary emotions. First of all, is the emotion a direct reaction to an external event? Then it's primary. Number two, when the initiating event receded, did the emotions recede? Primary. Number three, is the emotion becoming more intense over time? Secondary. Number four, do you experience the emotion more frequently than the events that prompted the emotion? Secondary. Number five, does the emotion continue long after the event, interfere with your abilities in the present, and affect new and different experiences? Secondary. Number six, is the emotion complex, ambiguous, and difficult to understand? Secondary. Is it really that important to know the difference between the two? Yes. Each type requires very different tools to cope with them effectively. Let's look at a couple of emotions that do not fit the facts for a primary emotion. Envy, for example, fits when, based on thoughts or judgments, you compare yourself to people who have more than you have. You think you deserve what others have. You think life has treated you unfairly, or you're unlucky when you compare your life to that of another you think has it better. You think characteristics of another are more desirable than those you have. You think you're inferior, a failure, or mediocre in comparison to someone you would like to be like. Now, some physiological responses to this might be, first of all, note, secondary emotions do not have universal responses. So some possible responses to this might be feeling hot, face flushed, overall body rigidity, tight muscles, clenched teeth, mouth clamped closed, pain in the pit of your stomach. Secondary emotions can have any variety of intensity depending on the thoughts. Now, jealousy fits when, based on thoughts or judgments, your partner tells you that he or she desires more time alone. Potential competitors pay attention to someone you love. A person you are romantically involved with looks at someone else. Someone ignores you while talking to a friend of yours. You believe there is a threat to an important relationship. Some physiological responses to this might be, first of all, note, secondary emotions do not have universal responses. So some possible responses to this might be breathlessness, fast heartbeat, a lump in your throat, muscle tension, teeth clenching. Again, secondary emotions can have any variety of intensity depending on the thoughts. Let's take a look at how secondary emotions work. Secondary emotions turn emotions into complex reactions. They increase the intensity of your reactions. Differentiating between primary and secondary emotions provides powerful coping skills. Some of these are triggered by thinking about what might happen, what might have happened, what did not happen, etc. Unlike primary emotions, which are triggered only by actual occurrences. The secondary emotion can bring on another thought, which in turn can trigger another secondary emotion. It can get so thick with added layers that it can become difficult to find where it all began. The sooner we break the chain of adding on more emotions, the sooner we are able to lessen the pain. In order to address the primary emotional reaction to any given circumstance, you must first be able to figure out what did come first, or at least as close to the beginning emotion as you possibly can. The emotion color wheel may be a helpful tool for this. You may have noticed by now that the exact number of and the names of the primary emotions has yet to be agreed upon. There are some emotions that are clearly the core emotions, but there are others that may or may not be. Izard and Plutchik define the primary emotions into 8 segments. Each of these have a short-lived core emotion. The core emotions represent the most intense ends of the emotional dimension. Ecstasy and terror, for example, are powerful and tend to be short-lived. The core emotions tend to be related to immediate survival and can be thought of as more instinctive. They are the emotions of the gut. For the purpose of our lessons, these will not be seen as separate from the primary emotions. The primary emotions may be echoes of their core, but what they lack in strength, they make up for in length. These emotions tend to last longer than the initial core. Terror, for example, is a quasi-physical reaction to a present and current danger where fear can take into account the danger level the threat actually is. It is more influenced by the cognitive faculties of memory and imagination. They are still greatly instinctive, aimed at survival, and considered gut emotions. Using our model for describing primary emotions, let's take a look at the following illustration. The primary emotion fear can begin with the core emotion terror. Our setting here will be, I'm walking alone in the dark. I heard the gravel crunch behind me. I felt an immediate, intense feeling of terror. But I was not suddenly grabbed from behind, which caused the emotion to drop from intense to strong, from terror to fear. The core, in this case terror, is so short-lived that it fades into the primary emotion, fear. Think about the last time you got startled. Maybe you gasped. Your heart skipped a beat. You felt like you were punched in the stomach. Then, you looked around, saw everything was okay, and the core faded. Going back to our illustration at walking in the dark, I heard the gravel crunch behind me, but I was not suddenly grabbed from behind. I quickly felt a strong emotion of fear. Because the core emotion is actually an early warning signal preparing one for sudden protective or survival action, it is short-lived. These serve that purpose alone on the emotional dimension spectrum. Core emotions functions as a part of primary emotion unless, through our thoughts or judgment, we convince ourselves there is a reason to feel that emotion intensity. If you evoke these emotions out of their set purpose, they become secondary emotions. Again, secondary emotions appear after primary emotions. They're triggered by some other kind of emotion. For example, where the fear of a threat turns to anger that fuels the body for a fight reaction. They may also come from more complex chains of thinking. One way we can add emotions not directly related to the situation is to imagine that things are worse than or better than they actually are. We can make the emotion more intense than what it would be if it fit the facts of the triggering event. So core emotions can become secondary emotions. Once again, secondary emotions appear after primary emotions. They are triggered by some other kind of emotion. Using our example of fear of a threat that turns to anger that fuels the body for a fight reaction. Your thoughts about your primary emotion can trigger you to feel another of the basic emotions, which then becomes a secondary emotion. You might become angry that you were scared. Fear with judgment can trigger anger. So basic emotions could become secondary emotions. And again, emphasizing, secondary emotions appear after primary emotions. They may also come from more complex chains of thinking. It is important to note, if it is not a core emotion and it is not a basic emotion, it is a secondary emotion. All remaining emotions are a combination of two or more emotions. All combinations are secondary emotions. This wheel takes even the primary emotions down in intensity level without blending. Both wheels and the combination chart can be found in your assignment handouts. Sometimes you have to find the triggered primary emotion by starting with the emotion you feel now and work your way through the secondary emotions to get back to the beginning. Next week in our peer-guided DBT lessons emotion regulation module, we'll be continuing our study on differentiating between primary and secondary emotions.